It looks just like me. All right. It is the 25th of October. Do you know where your ancestors were 605 years ago today?
Probably plowing the fields.
Well, not if they were where one of mine was. 1415 was the Battle of Agincourt. Why, did you have an ancestor there? I had one. So, how many of you have seen Shakespeare's Henry V? And the Kenneth Branagh version?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the good version.
Just actually watched it the other night.
I watched it very early this morning. And yes, it's a strange thing for a Quaker to be leading off with, but how many else of us know where any of our ancestors was in 1415 by name even? If you are not familiar with the story, Henry V of England had a claim on the French throne, and he decides to invade. He's talked into it, unfortunately, by the church. And so he does. Now, and he thinks he is going to go into Normandy, retake part of his ancestral patrimony, and then march on to Paris and take the crown itself. It doesn't work that way. First thing is they uncover a plot against his life, so that delays things. And then when he gets to the first town in France, which is the port city of Harfleur, which is now part of the French port of Le Havre at the mouth of the Seine, which is the river that runs through Paris down to the English Channel, they get bogged down there. It takes a lot longer to take the city than anybody thought. The English are starting to come down with dysentery, and they are very sick and very tired. And so they decide that they will march across northern France and go to the city of Calais, which is also on the English Channel and a port. And they'll just spend the winter there and come forth in the spring and get reinforcements from England. Well, it doesn't work that way either, because the French, who have been remarkably slow to respond to the invasion, finally get off of their backsides, and they start burning all the bridges that he'll need. So there's a chase through northern France in October in the mud and the pouring rain. And they finally catch the English at the little town of the castle of Agincourt. And of course, the English think that they are going to be wiped out. The French certainly think the English are going to be wiped out, because they dub all of these fighters knights the day before the battle. And it doesn't happen that way. The English win partially because the French let them move forward twice. I mean, the first part of the day, the English and the French were just sort of looking at each other, and neither one was doing anything. And then they moved forward not once but twice. The French let them do this, and let them set up twice before they start charging. Well, the field is set up so that there are woods on each side that sort of funnel in towards where the English are at the narrow end, and there's more mud there than at Woodstock. In fact, one of the legends is that the highest ranking English casualty, who was the second Duke of York, drowned because he fell off his horse in full plate armor, which was about 80 to 100 pounds of extra weight, and couldn't get back up and drowned in the mud. There's nothing to it. I mean, it's a 19th century story, so it's like 500 years later people were telling this story. I mean, it's a good story. People remember it, but it didn't happen. And what happens is that the French are all eager to get the high dollar English prisoners so they can charge ransom before they'll be set free to go home. And the French mass up down at the bottleneck where the English are, and the English open fire, and every so often in the film you hear that awful whoosh of the arrows coming, and death rains down from the skies, and 10,000 French die. I mean, it basically wiped out most of the leadership of France for years. And the English lost almost nobody. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. And it sort of makes you think of the old saying, let's see, John Lennon, wasn't it? Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. Yeah. The Jews didn't expect to be carried off into captivity in Babylon, but they were. And they didn't expect, a lot of them didn't expect to be told to get ready to go home after a generation and a half. But that happened too. And luckily they had prophets who prepared them for each stage of that process. But they had made other plans. How many of you know your North Carolina history? Okay. On the 24th of October in 1590, John White, anybody recognize the name John White? You should. Ollie, do you recognize it? Exactly. John White had been to Roanoke twice. And the second trip was in 1590. He had been 3 times. He had been on an earlier trip, then he went there with the 1587 group, which is the famous Lost Colony, and then he went back supposedly with supplies for them. When he got there, they were all gone. There was no sign of a struggle. There were the letters C-R-O carved in a post, which meant that at least some of them had the intention to go down to the Croatoans, who were a friendly Native American nation who lived on Hatteras Island. But the expedition had stopped off to do a bit of looting and plundering of the Spanish in the Caribbean, and they got there late. White had left members of his family there, his daughter and son-in-law, Eleanor and Ananias Dare, and got there on what would have been the third birthday of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare. But nobody was there to greet him. And he couldn't convince the ships to go down to Hatteras Island to look for the settlers, partly because a hurricane came up, blew up, and they decided it was best to get back out to sea. And so on the 24th of October in 1590 is when John White lands back in England and never saw his daughter, son-in-law, or granddaughter again. To this day, we still don't know what happened to all of them. Well, probably since there were almost 120 of them, the Native Americans couldn't take them in one group, so they probably split up into several groups. And there were three different destinations that they had talked about. So it is entirely possible that one part of the settlers went to each one of the destinations, but they were lost track of. Nobody planned it, it just happened. Alrighty, when you were filling out your bingo cards for 2020, how many of you had put down pandemic that kills nearly 250,000 of us in the year?
I expected any more deaths, honestly.
Yeah.
It's starting to peak again.
Yep.
So just you wait.
I hope not.
Yeah, we all hope not. At the start of the year, I didn't think that I would be burying somebody. And Saturdays are a little rough still because the stroke happened exactly 13 weeks ago, so that's a quarter of a year. And followed by most of 2 weeks in Baptist, and then she was gone. And I have to say, I haven't missed anybody that much in at least 30 years. I didn't plan for it. Moses sent out spies to go look at the land of Canaan. They had been slaves in Egypt. They had crossed the sea. They had wandered around a little bit. They had camped at Mount Sinai. They had been given commandments from God. And Moses sends spies, one from each of the 12 tribes, out to go look at the land. And the spies come back. And the first part of their report is, how fertile the land is in very glowing terms. And then they start talking about how strong the inhabitants are. Some of them made the Israelite spies feel like they were looking at giants. And 10 of those 12 spies couldn't see going on. And Moses tries to reason with them, saying, look, God will be with us if we'll just go. But they won't. And in the book of Numbers, the 14th chapter, it tells what happens then. God changes his mind. God was going to go with them into the promised land and drive out the Canaanites. But now God has decided to wait until everybody who brought the report that they couldn't do it, and everybody who believed that report that they couldn't do it, died. So that the new generation who weren't used to being slaves could go forward. God had made other plans, and then life happened. And then we read this. And Moses spoke these words to all the Israelites, and the people mourned deeply. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the mountaintop, saying, Here we are, and we shall go up to the place that the Lord said, for we have offended. So they are going to go ahead with the original plan anyway. And Moses said, Why is it that you are overstepping the Lord's word when it will not succeed? Do not go up, for the Lord is not in your midst, lest you be routed before your enemies. The Amalekite and the Canaanite are there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword, for have you not turned back from the Lord, and the Lord will not be with you. And still they strove to go up to the mountaintop, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and Moses did not budge from the midst of the camp. And the Amalekite and the Canaanite who dwelled on that mountain came down and struck them and scattered them all the way to Hormah. Or scattered them until they were destroyed. Hormah is the Hebrew word for destruction, or one of them. We find ourselves right now as a meeting in much the same place, with much the same choice. I mean, a year ago, when we had our last meeting for worship in the old meeting house, how many of us thought that we would be here, 13 months later, essentially, of which 6 or 7 we haven't been able to meet in person, except at Bible study, and even then we had to wait. So what do we do? As Quakers, we are uniquely in a position to make use of the time. Quakers know how to wait. From the first recorded protest in modern history against slavery, which was in Germantown monthly meeting in 1688, until it became an offense that would get you disowned from Quakers, from Quakerism, to keep slaves, unless you had very specific conditions, such as you were keeping the slaves' paperwork so that they would be safe. You were letting them live their own lives. You weren't even, you didn't even necessarily require them to come to meeting with you if they didn't want to. That period was almost 90 years. Those North Carolina yearly meeting that has recently undergone such trouble was the last yearly meeting in what became the United States to make that determination, and we did it in 1776. It was another 90 years, essentially, before the rest of the country caught up with us, and we didn't have a major split over it. We had no war about it. because we know how to wait. Some of us are concerned about the future of this meeting. And I say to you, that's a right concern, but I will point out that since we have started meeting together in person again, we have had a higher rate of visitors than I thought possible. This portion of our service, with the prepared messages and the prepared music, that might go away. I think that the essential part of the meeting, though, will go on in whatever form. And I am reminded of the words in the book of Isaiah. Who among you will give ear to this, will listen and attend for the time to come? We have no idea what the time to come is going to look like, but it will come, and it will come whether we're ready for it or not, and whatever plans we've made on the way. So the first thing that we have to do is first to see where we are, really. We are not the same meeting that we were when I joined, when Judith was pastor, almost 25 years ago. And we are certainly not one of the biggest congregations in Winston-Salem anymore, which is over 60 to 70 years ago now. First, see what is, and wait on the Lord and respond to that.